So thank you, everybody, for attending session 2 of the Vbcc Virtual User Conference. Little excited that we're doing it virtual, sad that we're not going to see everybody in person, so please feel free to share your video, your screen if you would like to. As you can see, we're trying. A few housekeeping things before we start. This is being recorded, and we are going to post it on our website in the next couple days here. We'll also send everybody some follow-up stuff in the next couple days as well. All attendees are on mute. And again, we'd really love to see you on camera if you want to. During the session, please put your questions into the chat box as well. I know this is a Q&A session and everybody did submit some questions already, but if you think of anything during the session, throw them in there. If we have time, we'll certainly try to get to those as well. And after this session, don't forget to visit the virtual business partner hall. Although our valued vendors aren't there, they did provide us with a lot of content. It is at v-bcc.com, and there's a link right on the front page there. And now, for the reason you're actually here. Today, we have the pleasure of introducing Lisa, Dion, and Justin Teague, two of our top-notch consultants. Some of you probably already know them. Lisa's been with us for a little over a year now, Lisa? 2 years? 7 years?
Yes, yeah. About a year and a half
Justin,
now, yes.
Okay, and Justin just recently joined us within the last year. However, they both have many years of experience behind them joining the team here, and we know that you will love what they have to say. So with that, I'm going to give the floor to you guys. Thank you so much.
All right, yeah, I'm gonna go through some questions first and then pass it off to Lisa, and then I'm gonna answer a few kind of technical or system related questions at the end of the presentation. If you have follow-up questions, like Kelly said, put them in the chat. We'll do the best to answer them as they come in or at the end of the session, depending on how they kind of line up. And I will actually also be emailing everyone a copy of my Q&A sheet with the questions and answers so that you can go back over them if you want to, or you can delete the document, whatever you want to do with it. It's yours. So the first question that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go through some inventory stuff. What is the best way to unreceive inventory received at the wrong cost or on the wrong date? And so the suggestion that the question asker had was, well, do I do a return of goods, or do I process through inventory management through transaction entry and do an adjustment? And usually here, what you're going to want to do is an adjustment, because you're still receiving the goods, so you don't necessarily need to return them to the vendor. That's more complicated than you need to make the situation. And I am going to share my second screen here where I do have Sage open. And so, yeah, you're just going to want to run through transaction entry, push in an adjustment for the original transaction date. So whenever you originally received the goods, we'll post your adjustment to that date, adjust out the quantity, post that transaction, and then adjust it back in at the right date or the right cost, or whatever situation you're in where you need to fix your inventory. That's going to be the most direct way to fix that problem. Actually, let me make sure I can see my chat. Okay, so the next question I got is one that I think comes up pretty common, which is, why do the item tabs sometimes not match? So they're in item maintenance. There are a few places where you can see quantities. One of them is here right on this main tab, but then there's also a quantity tab that has your on hand and your on PO, etc., by warehouse. And these two numbers on occasion can disagree. There's also, oh, I'm sorry, yes. I see we had a follow-up question on the inventory. How will that affect the invoice? There will be a large difference in the receipt versus the invoiced amounts. Will this hit COGS and offset the adjustment made through IM? So that's sort of why you want to process it through the inventory. If you're worried about you received the wrong dollar amount on an invoice, then you might want to process a return to correct the invoice totals. But the question, I think, was mostly about if you had the wrong costing and it was messing up your cost of goods and inventory, because doing it through an adjustment in inventory management will correct the cost of goods when you receive it out at the wrong cost and then back in at the right cost. That's why you do it that way, so that you adjust your inventory valuation is correct. If the concern is more that the invoice is correct, or then you might need to do a return of goods and re-receive the inventory. Does that make sense? If there's landed costs involved. So yeah, that's a little bit like there you also really want to probably instead of doing a return, you might want to do an invoice adjustment in addition to the inventory adjustment, and kind of handle those two things separately. So an inventory adjustment to correct your cost of goods and your inventory valuation, and then an adjustment to the invoice to correct for the landed cost, so that all those numbers line up correctly. Okay, so back to question 2, item tabs not matching us as that. Okay, cool, great. So the reason why the item quantity tabs cannot match is because they're actually, even though they're all in one task, they're actually coming from 2 different tables. So this main window here is CI item, and the quantity is IM item warehouse. Normally, under like normal operation, those 2 numbers will match up, but occasionally, because of posting error, or sometimes just like a workstation will crash during a receipt, for instance. There are a lot of reasons why the static count in CI item can get knocked off course from the count that is kept actively from transactions in item warehouse. And so the question asker had a few questions about that. One, how do you find these discrepancies rather than just stumbling on them? And generally speaking, there's 2 good ways you could do that. You could create a business insights view, and I'll actually be doing a session on business insights in detail later today. But long story short, you could create a view to compare those 2 numbers in those 2 places so that you can see if they line up, or you could make like a crystal report to line up those 2 disparate numbers to make sure that they are matching out. And if they don't, then usually what you want to do is, first of all, before you do anything, always back up your data to make sure that in case something goes wrong, you have a clean record of your company. But there's a utility in item maintenance for recalculating item history. And so if your system has miscounted, like transactions, and it's not recording the right quantities between those 2 locations, running this a lot of the time will help it to recount and figure out where it went wrong. So you'd run this recalculate, and then you would run a rebuild of the inventory sort files, which is located in library master under rebuild sort files. And that process, the recalculating of the history, can take a while. Rebuilding the sort files, generally speaking, takes no time at all. You're talking about just hitting a button and then it just does it pretty much instantly. on rare occasions, doing this won't correct the values, and sometimes you also run into issues with when you have like lot or serial items. You'll run into issues with the item cost file not lining up. In that case, you might need to reach out to us or to dig into it a little deeper. But 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 times running through the process I just described will get you in the right direction. The next question I had was about custom lookups, and we'll be talking about this a little bit later too in the technical segment. But why are my custom lookups missing, and how can I create new ones? So custom lookups are usually stored by task and by user. There's like a set of files which store all of your lookups system wide. Occasionally, through file corruption, or more commonly, usually when you're doing a migration and a conversion, you can sometimes lose some of these custom views. But fortunately, they're really easy to recreate. Say we were trying to create a view for ourselves in item maintenance. We wanted to see a piece of information like we wanted to see the primary warehouse for items in our system, and that's not on our default lookup. So we can hit this custom button and create a new view, and we're going to call it primary warehouse, say. And so the other thing here too is if you want the new view to be your default for you specifically, just check this little box, default view. We're going to just go here, and then it shows us all the fields basically in the task, so that we can choose whatever we're looking for, and add that. So I'm going to add the default warehouse code. It's the thing I care about the most, so I'm going to move it up a bit too. And then I'm just going to hit next. If you want, you can pre-filter. I'm not going to do that here, but you can. And then I'm just going to, that's all fine, hit finish. So now when I open my view, it's defaulting to my primary warehouse view. And as you can see, we have default warehouse code. My demo data has a really exciting dynamic list for that. It's 000, go figure. But that's a pretty easy process. You can do this for any lookup basically in the system, and you're creating a lookup just for yourself, so you can build it however you want. Let's take a beat there. Were there any questions about those last two? I'll just take a second here before I move onward to a question about bin locations. Okay. So I had a question: what is the maximum length of the bin field in inventory, and is it possible to have multiple locations? So I looked that up. The max bin field length is 10 by default, and normally you can't have multiple bin locations in the default Sage for a single item, but there are several different multi-bin solutions that integrate fully with your inventory, which let you do that. So, and they're pretty granular. You can turn them on by individual warehouse, and they let you like greatly expand upon Sage's default functionality for storing bin locations. By default, in current versions of Sage, if you have 100C, and generally speaking at this point, we do recommend that you move over to that model, you get a free license for DSD's multi-bin basic by default. And that, like for the lion's share of basic functionality, like if you're in the position where you're just wishing you had 2 to 5 bin locations for your items, that is going to give you that functionality. So it's definitely something to consider. That covers all of my inventory questions that we received. So unless there are any follow-ups or other questions that occurred to people there, I'm going to pass it over to Lisa so that she can answer some other questions, and then it's going to bounce back to me for some GL and technical questions.
Great, thank you, Justin. So one of the first questions was getting an email about Deluxe offering e-checks, a paper-based check system that delivers payments digitally through email, wondering if this is going to be offered by Sage in addition to the ACH payments. Nothing that I know of is in the works for that. The question asker did say they have not set up ACH yet, but are considering it. So utilizing paperless office and electronic delivery in conjunction with ACH would give you similar functionality. Some things you can do in advance, if you are thinking of setting up these options here, would be to first off in paperless office, set up your form code maintenance, where you are enabling electronic delivery, and also stating here that in the accounts payable that you want to deliver during the check register update. What that'll do for you is after you have set up your vendors to for the paperless office functions, when you generate the check, it will email them a PDF stub of the invoices that you are paying, and along with being able to set up an electronic delivery message detailing what is in there as well. So we'll give you similar functionality, not exactly an e-check, but it will give you the ability to do that. If you are interested in doing that, some pre-work that you could do would be going into your vendors and making sure you have contacts set up, which does help with the options in paperless office. So in this vendor, I had set up my accounts payable payment as a contact code. And then in the paperless off button, I would go ahead and select the type of document, which would be my AP check. I would check the email box. And then on the email tab, I would pull in my contact code, or I could have just manually entered in email addresses here as well. So every time a check is cut and an electronic payment, that remittance will automatically be emailed to the contacts you listen to here. Newer versions allow you to define if it's a carbon copy or a BCC on those emails addresses as well. The next question that I received was going into purchase order and asking if PO lines can be copy and pasted or an entire purchase order copied. Yes, the entire purchase order can be copied when you are in PO entry. After you sign the next PO number, you have a copy from button. And there you have a couple of different options of where you're copying it from, either an open purchase order history, receipt history, or an AP invoice history. And you would just select the PO number that you would like to copy it from and say, okay. And then it's created the PO based upon that purchase order, which then you could go in and additionally modify. But this would work well if you have like large, basically kind of repeating orders, cut down on your data entry by using the copy function. On the lines per se, there's not so much of a copy paste, but you can paste into here. So if you had copied the item number from like item maintenance, you could paste that item in here as well. Another favorite question, how to close, purge, and remove old purchase orders. So with Sage, a purchase order is not considered complete until the quantity ordered, received, and invoiced all match each other, which can lead to, especially when you're running your purchases clearing report, you notice that you have a very old purchase orders still lingering on there because those three fields do not match each other. So the way that you would need to do that would be utilizing either the purchases clearing report or the open purchase order report and determining which POs should have been closed, either because they had not been, the received quantity was different than the invoice quantity, which you can see on the purchases clearing report. It'll show you the ordered, received, and invoice. Also, the last invoice date, which is a good indicator that you're most likely never going to get that part back in again and that the PO should be closed. To do that manually, you would need to go into each purchase order that has this situation and either do a receipt of goods so that your receipt equals your invoice. Going that method, though, you would need to make sure that you also then adjust out your inventory. If the invoice does not match the receipt, then you would need to complete a PO receipt of invoice and adjust off that invoice through AP. If it's just the situation that the received and the invoice matched each other, then you would go into the purchase order and change the quantity ordered to match that, and then it would be considered complete and would no longer be on the purchases clearing report. If you do have, which we do run into often, is that sometimes the purchases clearing gets a tad bit neglected. If you do have really old, years ago open orders, there are utilities that we can assist you with in cleaning that up, either utilizing Visual Integrator to import in those received an invoice and update the ordered quantities. There's another utility we could utilize that would just mark the PO complete, and then we could go ahead and purge the purchase orders from your open purchase order file. That will then additionally require reconciliation to your purchases clearing and your general ledger, most likely involving a journal entry to bring those two back into balance again. One thing I did want to point out is that the standard open purchase order report, if you do not make any changes to your selections, always includes the completed, which you most probably do not want to see when you're just trying to look at an open purchase order report. And often I forget to uncheck that as well. So what I'll do is create a report setting, and you just click Save As and give it a name. And you can choose to make this your default report as well. We say OK here, and then I'm going to uncheck the completed and click on Save. So the next time I go to run this report, if I choose the open only, I don't have to remember to uncheck the completed, and I would truly be looking at my open purchase orders, which might help you with the situation of old things laying around, because also the completed, unless you utilize one of the utilities to purge completed purchase orders, do not clear from the open file necessarily automatically, but it is controlled by the purchase order option of the days to retain completed purchase orders. This one's currently set to 90, so once it's been 90 days since completion and I do my PO period in processing, if it meets that criteria, then it would purge it from the open files to the history files, which could be another reason if you're seeing completed POs lingering around for a long time, this number could be set really high. And in that case, that is where you could do the purge completed purchase orders. That does not remove them from the system entirely. It just moves them into the history tables as long as you're retaining purchase order history. I lost my chat, but I didn't see if there was any questions on either one of those.
Well, looks like we're still good on questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Justin. Next question is going into accounts receivable, and an alert or notification that the customer reaches their credit limit and or is past due. With standard Sage, there's not really an alert function that will do that for you. There is the add-on of the Sage and Alerts workflow that comes with hundreds of pre-configured events, which the both of those are included with that as a pre-configured event. The other option you could do would be utilizing the Business Insights Explorer, which I did a little quick one. And like Justin said, he's going to be doing a session later on today going into more detail about that. But what I did here is I went into the edit column settings and removed the ones by unchecking that I did not want. But I added a calculated field to tell me if I was over the credit limit or not, which is basically just taking my current balance, subtracting from my credit limit, and then telling me how much I'm over my credit limit. And then within the filter builder, I said that I only want to see things where they're a penny or greater over their credit limit. So it's not truly an alert to the fact that you are over the credit limit, but it is a quick and easy way to see more of like an exception report of those who are approaching their credit limit or over their credit limit. And you can have multiple views and quite easy to set up and navigate through utilizing the Business Insight Explorers. The next question, what is the best method for handling prepayments, customer prepayments? So of course you would record the prepayment through cash receipts entry. One thing I usually suggest is so that it kind of doesn't get muddled is if you already have the customer sales order created, instead of just a generic or using the check as the invoice number for that prepayment, it could be the sales order that you use. It could be the customer PO number that you utilize, which makes it a bit easier when you are looking at the customer account for what that prepayment should have been applied towards. Also, after you create the prepayment in AR in the cash receipts, you would want to make sure that you go back into sales order entry and go into the totals tab, enter your deposit type amount as check and your check number, and then the amount of the deposit that you received from the customer. So then when you invoice this sales order to your customer, it will reduce your customer deposits account and create an invoice only for the remaining amount of the invoice of the goods that you will be shipping to them. The next question, also still in AR, is there a way to post a cash receipt from one company into additional companies? It wasn't quite sure if this was referring to like a centralized payment going into multiple companies within customers within Sage, or a truly applying it to multiple companies, like you have ABC or CDF as companies within Sage. If it's going with that you get a single payment that covers multiple of your companies, you do have a couple of options for the cash receipts. One would be to enable the national accounts feature in AR setup and options. This allows you to link your bill to and your sold to. So if you're selling it to like one franchise and they have multiple locations, but everything is just remitted by one payer, that national accounts works really well. It creates that link between the entities there. So that is one option with national accounts. And that makes it so that the invoices actually display on the parent item account, and the children will be referenced in the invoices tab as the sold to. So you'll be able to link back the two of them together, and you can still retain sales by individual sold to company, but this will make it easier when you do a cash receipt. Your other option in cash receipt, if it's a similar kind of situation, but you do not have the national accounts feature enabled, is that when you are in cash receipts, you do have the option. So say you get a check and it's covering for multiple of your customers, and it just lists out all the invoice numbers, but some are for customer A and some are for customer B, and it was all paid by customer C. Instead of having to split out your check stub and figure out which customer each one of those belong to, you can simply just enter in the invoice number here and not enter in the customer. Enter in the check number, and it'll automatically fill in the amount received and populate the lines tab with that invoice number. And then you can just repeat that for all of the invoices that are paid, even though they're all coming from different customers. I am still linking it back together by having them all have the same check number. So kind of a quicker way, if this is what you're looking for as far as applying a cash receipt there. If you're truly looking, though, that you're wanting it to go into multiple companies with Sage, that would be where you're going to be needing an enhancement. DSD has several of those that handle multi-companies, and we'd really need to pursue going down that path if that's more of what you're looking for that functionality. Another question in AR, which this also would apply to vendors as well, if you're wanting to go back and enable that ACH payments that I spoke of earlier. The question was, is there a way to update all customers at once with paperless office to allow invoices to check instead of using one at a time? And the answer is yes. We can create a Visual Grader import job for you, and you would prepare an Excel file that would have the customer number, telling us the document type, which in AR we have several options. So we'd have like SO invoice as the document type. And then on the Excel file, you would provide the list of email addresses that you want imported, or if we should be utilizing a contact code. But it does give you a method of being able to export out your data from like where you have your contact set up probably in Outlook or something, and then we just match it up to the Sage customer number, and those can all be imported in that way instead of doing them manually one at a time. Next question that I had was about Sage and credit card processing, and that the fact that the credit cards do not appear in the bank reconciliation module and you have to enter those manually. Again, going back to Visual Integrator might be the best solution for you of doing that. There's not currently a function of being able to add those credit card charges on there. We could utilize the deposit transaction report to be your source file, and then create an import that would update the bank rec module with the credit card charges that are paid automatically on the invoice. Would be the best way to go about getting that done. And some questions I get quite often is about trying to delete a work ticket that has transactions against it. If you have, say, done a partial shipment and your customer is now canceling the balance of the order, or you issue materials in advance and you're not actually going to make the order anymore, if you go in and try and click on delete, you get the message of you cannot delete this order because work ticket activity exists. Work ticket activity can be anything of a material issue, a labor transaction, a direct cost, a PO being linked, or a partial invoice. I know it's kind of frustrating, but it's really in your best interest because it makes it that your WIP does not get out of balance. If you just deleted the transaction, then you would not be relieving the WIP account properly, and the WIP report in your GL would not get out of balance, and they wouldn't tie to each other. So when you have this situation here, whether it's a customer make to order type of work ticket or a make to stock work ticket, in both instances, you would want to change the parent quantity ordered to 0. And then you would complete your either your invoice through sales order invoice data entry at 0, which will just show nothing. It won't send out anything to the customer, but it'll basically just close your work ticket for you. Or complete the make to stock closing, again, making sure that we're at 0 so that it doesn't put any incorrect quantities into inventory or bill your customer incorrectly. And one last question in the JobOps Sage manufacturing area is the updating of the daily parts usage. Typically, when you update this daily, you just go in here and click Printer Preview, do not make any selections, and you go to update say yes to update, and you're going to get a message about the transactions falling out of date here because I have some old transactions that did not get updated. And you will get the lovely warning, some transactions fall outside of the period. So your update will not be allowed. This is really quick and easy to fix. All you do is say, okay, reopen the daily parts usage. And you want to make sure that your posting date and your transaction through date are in the same period, and then Printer Preview again, and it will allow you to update just those August transactions. Then you can go back and you can update your current period transactions. And with all that, I'm going to turn it back to Justin. Unless there's any questions, sorry, I skipped questions and didn't see chat.
I don't see any. Yeah, the JobOps ones are good too, because I get that one quite a bit about deleting the sales order with the work ticket associated. That is good to know. Okay, I have some questions about general ledger. I have one tech question about sales order common error, and then I have a bunch of kind of miscellaneous and technical questions I want to get to. So let's talk about general ledger first. Lisa, could you pass over the screen sharing? Thank you. And I'm gonna go back to screen 2 here. And so a question that I've kind of gotten with relative frequency in relation to out of balance general ledger accounts. And so people will ask, how do I correct a single general ledger account that is out of balance? So rather than a two-sided entry that was posted to the wrong place, what if only one of my accounts is out of balance because of a posting error or some kind of mishap which caused a single account to be out of balance? And Sage has a system for resolving this. So if we go into general journal entry and we're going to do, let's say source journal J, just a general journal entry. We're going to post it for today. Or, well, I guess it's the 16th. Man, that's how long it's been since I closed my Sage. So I'll post it for today. And then we're going to look at the lines. And so normally, if you were going to post a regular journal entry, you'd have a debit side and a credit side. Let's say we just needed to debit our cash on hand account was out of balance by, $10, let's say. So I'm going to just enter $10 on the debit side, no offset, and then I'm going to hit accept. Now, when I do this, it's going to give me a message. It's going to say the journal entry is out of balance by $10 because technically it is. The entry must balance to post to the general ledger. So with the right security permissions, you're going to have 4 options: correct, which will bring you back to it; accept, which will just not let you post this, it'll just close it; or delete, to delete the entry. But the one we want is 1. So when we hit this button, that's going to tell Sage, hey, I know this is out of balance. I'm doing a specific thing. I'm trying to fix a specific ledger account which is out of balance because of an error or something. So Sage has a button that you can hit that tells the system, I know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to fix this account. And then you can just post the journal like normal. This happens like not frequently, but often enough that it's important to know how to do it so that you can address errors like that. The next question that I had kind of got asked in a few different ways, but I sort of summed it up. Why does X report, any given report, not match with the GL report or vice versa? And so a lot of the time, people will say, look at the general ledger detail report, and they'll be looking at their accounts receivable aged invoice report. And those two reports will have different values, and they'll think, oh, well, my accounts receivable is now out of balance with my general ledger. But really, those reports, any 2 given reports, like one in general ledger and one in accounts receivable, they might line up sometimes or be very similar, but those reports are not actually meant to true up with each other. There are a lot of reasons why at any given moment, your aged invoice report might be different than your general ledger balance, or the balance in the account maintenance in general ledger. So when you're trying to reconcile your subledgers with your general ledger accounts, you want to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. So you always want to be using the trial balance both in accounts receivable and in general ledger, because those are the only reports from those 2 modules. And say the same thing for accounts payable or inventory. Those are the only 2 reports that are meant to line up. And so if you're seeing a different value anywhere else, that probably doesn't mean anything. It just means that they're different reports, and there could be a lot of reasons why they might not line up. And you also want to make sure, again, that you have, say you have multiple inventory accounts, you want to make sure that you select all of those on the general ledger trial balance. And you want to make sure that your print trial balance as of date is the same date. Otherwise, you can, you're not comparing 2 like things. So if they don't add up, that's to be expected. If these 2, if you make sure you have the same date, all your accounts accounted for, and then those numbers don't line up, that might mean that you have a discrepancy. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you were looking at your accounts receivable balance and it was suddenly way out of whack, it was like, well, maybe you have a future dated transaction or something. Maybe you have an invoice that's, was posted to the wrong date or something, or that was just future dated for, on purpose. And it might just not be showing up yet on the GL detail report because you're selecting for the current date and not whatever that future date is. And there are other reasons why that, that sort of thing might happen, but it's just something good to keep in mind. The next question I had is kind of a straightforward thing, and it's not really general ledger, although it kind of interacts with general ledger, which has to do with fiscal year maintenance. And this is something that I see a lot of people get tripped up with because you don't really have to go into fiscal year maintenance all that often, and the way it works is kind of counterintuitive. So say you were getting a message that a fiscal year didn't exist, like the current fiscal year or next year doesn't exist in the system because you haven't made it yet. You would have to go into fiscal year maintenance to add it, but the way it opens is kind of confusing. So when I go into fiscal year maintenance, it opens already on a record. It's already in 2020. And so like I can change the year, but now how do I add like, say I needed to add 2022. How do I do that? Well, you wouldn't expect you would have to hit accept before you could even, choose a record, but you do. It opens automatically to a fiscal year, and then you just need to hit accept. And now say I can just enter 2022 in here, hit, and then it just creates the future year. And it'll ask you sometimes if you want to create it from the previous fiscal year. I have it set to automatically do that. But it's just something that I find can trip people up sometimes because, at most you're adding fiscal years maybe once a year. Maybe you do, the next 3 years you set up and then you forget about it. And then you get, to the task and are wondering why you can't enter anything into this field. You just have to hit accept. Very straightforward. Yeah, sure, I'll save changes. Why not? The next question I had is in sales order. And this is one that you're likely not going to be able to fix by yourself, but I still included it because it can be like confusing or frustrating. And I think it's good to know what it is so that you aren't worried about it. In sales order, sometimes, say you're going to invoice a sales order or you're trying to ship a sales order, because those things are very similar as far as Sage is concerned. And it says that it's currently being invoiced, but you have no open invoice batches. That's not true. And you can't figure out why it thinks that. The reason why has to do with the data file. So to ensure that you don't double invoice any given order, there's a field on the sales order header table that stores what the current invoice number is. And sometimes, again, if you're posting invoices and your workstation crashes or something, or you go to create an invoice for an order and then you end up deleting it because you're not actually invoicing the customer now, or you were going to ship something and then you end up not shipping it. Sometimes the invoice value from that deleted record can hang out on the header in the sales order. So the sales order still thinks it's being invoiced, still thinks there's a current invoice, even though there isn't. And in that case, you'll probably need to contact us so that we can just fix the record, but it is easy to fix and not something to be alarmed about when you see it. So just a quick call to us and a quick fix. Just blanking out that field. Just to give you an idea of what that looks like. So this is data file display and maintenance, but it is this current invoice number field right here. Sometimes we'll just have a value where it shouldn't, and we just have to get rid of it. Okay, are there any questions about general ledger or sales order before I proceed to the technical miscellany? And I've got some doozies in here. Okay, off I go then. So the first question I had was about print settings, and that's a good one because the way that Sage handles your default print settings, the way it stores them is kind of complicated. And so troubleshooting printers, which can already be frustrating because printers can just be very frustrating, can be really difficult. So my print settings are defaulting to something weird or something that I don't want them to, or that I told it not to. How do I change them? So the thing you have to understand is that Sage stores printer settings by task and by workstation, and then also by sometimes by user. So if you have a custom setting for your workstation for a task, it can hold on to that print setting. So for instance, you might have checked some boxes, checked a printer, and have the printer set to print to duplex. And it just is holding on to that everywhere. It's printing to duplex. You check in your printer settings and default printer settings, and you don't see that setting there. So if we go into setup here in the specific task, and I see the GL question, and I will go back to that right after I explore this printer oddity. So if you open through setup in here and change the preferences, and this, obviously there's nothing here, but if you change the printing preferences through the print task, there are fields for things like whether you want to print duplex, whether you want to, how you want to format the page. And those can all be retained even though your actual settings on the printer are different. So you have to be cognizant of that. And the reverse can also be true. If you don't have any printer settings and you haven't set them up, Sage will default to whatever the default print settings are for that printer and then hang on to them. So generally speaking, best practice, if you can, have your printer set up to default to however you want it to behave in Sage. And make sure that your default printer in Windows is assigned to a specific printer that is the one you primarily use, because Sage also gets confused. There's a thing that Windows 10 does where it will manage your default printer for you automatically. Sage does not understand that. So you don't want to really be in that position because it can cause problems. So it's good to assign manually a default printer. If you go through all those settings, still can't figure out why is this printing weird, then definitely contact us and we can sort it out. But there are a lot of, that's a complicated question and it's very valid to ask. So back to GL, best practices is the naming and setting up budgets. So at the beginning of the new year, reports from prior year and current year pull the correct budget data. So let's go to general ledger. And we're going to go to budget maintenance. So you can carry over budgets from year to year. They can be named the same thing. So say you wanted to, and you could have next year budget, original budget, revised budget. You can add additional types of budgets as well if you wanted to store other information. And you can choose which of those show up here. But generally speaking, you assign budgets by account, and you can choose which ones are in the system that you're using. And that way, when you post, like you said, when you are pulling a report from the prior year and you want to see the budget year over year, you can compare them side by side. And you can set that up in budget maintenance as well. So say I wanted to always see original budget 2020, and then I wanted to see original budget for 2019. I wanted to see it right now. You could set that up so you can see them right side by side. So you could compare, obviously I don't have any budget set up in here, but you could see your side by side original this year, last year, and report off of them very clearly. So this year, last year, original, revised, whichever budget, I have my next year budget 3. You can set those up, determine which ones you see, determine which years you want to see on the report. That's all configurable. Does that answer your question? I hope. And I don't know that I mentioned it at the beginning, but if you have more specific, okay, cool. If you have more specific questions or follow-ups and we don't get to them, or you feel like I didn't quite answer, or we didn't quite answer the question, you can always feel free to contact me after the Q&A, and I can, we can talk about any specific burning questions. So back to technical oddities. This is a really, really common one. My fields are gone in X task. How can I get them back? So a lot of people and a lot of tasks have customized windows. They have, UDF fields, or like they've rearranged their windows. They have things arranged a particular way. Then one day they go into their task and the window looks really weird. Everything's gone. They don't know what happened. So the UI can corrupt objects. It can accidentally do this thing. Sometimes it's really easy for individual users to do this thing where they create a blank dummy panel that doesn't have any customizations at all on it. And then they don't know what's going on. Where did all my fields go? Oh my gosh, my window's broken. So it's really easy to fix. 99% of the time, all you have to do is just right click on a blank area, go to panel settings, reset panel, and then you just check this reset panel size and position and delete customizer modifications. And usually if you do those two things, hit OK, close out, go back in, your custom window will be back. On rare occasions, it's something else, like a more significant issue, but almost all the time, that's all you have to do is just reset the panel. It's just a really common thing that happens a lot because user interfaces are easy. Like, when you're constantly resizing or moving position of your windows, it's really easy for fields and their relative positioning to get messed up. And it's also equally easy to fix. So it's not ever anything to really worry about. And you can most of the time just fix it yourself just by right clicking and resetting and then going back in. I had a couple questions about extending different system fields. And so generically speaking, the answer to that question is no, you cannot extend most of the fields in the system. Say the sales order number or invoice number fields, those are fixed length, and there's no way without some kind of a third-party enhancement to extend those fields. Some fields, customer maintenance, in customer maintenance, the customer number, for instance, I checked, and item codes can also be extended. Those are options that you can turn on in the setup files to make those fields a little bit bigger. Like you can extend your customers out to 20 characters, for instance. The reverse is not true for UDFs. You can always make those longer. Like if you have a custom field that you added to the system and you need it to be longer, you can always make it bigger. And there are, for specific things like sales order, invoice, there are generally for some of those there are custom like add-ons that can make those longer, but out of the box they're the length that they are. Okay, we had a really good one about classic versus standard view. So which is better? Should everyone use one or the other? And is classic going away? So the answer is yes. In 2020, so already in Sage 2020, the classic view does not exist anymore. Generally speaking, you want everyone to be using the same view so that if you have issues with missing tasks or with display issues, everyone's running on the same system, so it's not confusing. Also, generally speaking, it's good to just get used to the new view with the ribbon. It's very similar to the way Microsoft Office looks. It's good to get used to it because after any version after 2020, Classic View is not there anymore. So unless you have a good reason to be using the Classic View, like say you have an old workstation that has an issue with a new one, barring something like that, you should be using the standard view now. It's, they've worked out all the bugs with it. It works very well. It has some nice security features that the old view doesn't have. For instance, if you have users who can only access certain parts of the software in the standard view, they can't even see the tasks that they can access. So it simplifies their views, declutters their menus. It's just really much better. So definitely recommend switching over if you can. I had a question about Sage Intelligence views for like executives. If there is a way to avoid having to have them in the system if they don't really need to be and they don't want to have to navigate it, which was a complicated question to answer in the abstract because there are a lot of ways that you can kind of manage that sort of thing. There's third-party software for scheduling report delivery. There is for Sage reports, you can also schedule through Task Scheduler. You can set up a job, choose like a report, say, and you can have it generate on a set schedule and then create a Windows task to email it to a specific person. And then there's, paid alternatives to that sort of thing. There's also a few freeware programs for scheduling reporting. Generally speaking, you're talking about some sort of a, not a huge, but a moderately sized project to set up the kind of lay down the groundwork for delivering reports on a schedule without accessing the system. And if anyone has questions about that or is interested, I would, be more than happy to discuss kind of potential groundwork for that sort of a thing, at a later date or after the presentation, because it is relatively complicated to set up. But it is certainly a thing that you can do, and some people have enough reports that they use and need regularly delivered that it's worth setting up some kind of a permanent solution for doing that for them, so they don't have to be constantly manually emailing them. My last tech question was specifically, what should I be aware of before upgrading to Sage 2020? But I really actually wanted to back that up and say, what should you be aware of before you upgrade to any version? Because that's a really important question to ask, is you should never take a upgrade lightly in the planning phase. You should say, what do I need to be thinking about before we even start planning a timeline for an upgrade? And so the first thing, most importantly, is what do I have in my software? So what modules do I have? What third-party tie-in programs do I have? And that's a question you can answer by looking either in system configuration or at the installed modules listing. See here, I can see all the modules that I have. So I see that I have manufacturing on my system. I have all these, various modules. It's important to understand what potential compatibility challenges you might be looking at. Sometimes third-party software isn't up to date with the most recent release or product update. And that's something that you should, definitely tell us and be aware of going in, so that when we do the upgrade, it's smooth. Another important question to think about is what custom reports you have, especially if you, it is possible, but not recommended, that you can have standard form code reports that have been customized at some point in the past. So if this standard form code, say I had modified, that is an important thing for us to know going into an upgrade, because if we don't back up that modified form and then we do the upgrade, Sage is going to overwrite it with a default version, and then you lose your custom form. So that's an important thing to always consider going in, is like, do I have custom forms on my menu or custom reports? Do they tie out to, you know, Excel or Access even? You know, do I have Excel sheets that connect with Sage? Those are all things to think about. Of course, you want to think about how the program changes as well. And, you know, there are various version changes that we will always provide you, like before any upgrade, a sheet of what's new, what's different, you know, what looks different, what actually works differently. That's also very important to consider, so that your people are ready for any changes to their software. That was it for my tech questions. Does anyone have any other clarifying questions, or any other follow-ups for things that I was talking about? If not, I have some things that we sort of talked about when you're asking for support help, when you have an error or a problem, what can you do to help us to diagnose it before we even get on the phone, before we even respond? So are there any follow-up questions? Okay. So there's like a few things that are really useful to have. One is always screenshots. So Sage will pop up errors, and usually the first error it pops up is not super informative. It'll be like error and number, and then maybe some characters, and that's it. And from that particular message, we can barely deduce anything. But oftentimes there'll be an info button, and if you can send a screenshot of the window that opens after you hit that info button, that tends to let us hone in on the error a lot better. Also, like any other related error messages you see, like even if they maybe don't actually pertain to Sage, helpful to have. It's better to have more information than not enough. The other thing to always consider is, where did the error happen and what were you doing when it happened? Because it's very easy to, you're just going about your day, minding your own business, and you get this weird error message that's really freaky. It's got a big red X, and you go right to your inbox and you say, help, my Sage is broken. Sage doesn't work anymore. And you shoot that off, and that is like totally understandable, because it's really scary when your software stops working, but it doesn't help us to figure out like, what happened. Like, it's better to say, to be able to send an email and say, hey, I was processing, accounts receivable invoices, and I got an error message when I went to update my invoice register. And here's the error message. I didn't do anything different than usual. What's going on? Like, that gives us so much more to start with before we even get on the phone. We can be doing research. We can be looking up the error message. We can be a lot closer to solving the problem before we even pick up the phone. And that's good, because we want to fix it as soon as we can, as fast as we can for you. The other thing that's good to check is, if you get an error message, do other users get the error message? Do other people on other workstations in the office? Like, if you can even try as yourself on a different workstation, that hones in on whether it's a problem on your workstation and we need to be looking at that specifically, or if it's a problem in Sage in general and we should be on the server looking at the data, or what have you. And you don't have to do these things. It's just good stuff to keep in mind. Extra information that you can give us that'll help us to get to the a solution to your problem a little bit faster than without it. That was about all I had. Lisa, do you have any other stuff that I missed in terms of submitting support requests that are helpful or that you like to have before you jump on the phone?
No, I think you pretty much covered it well on what to ask or what to provide us with so that we can get you a quick and efficient answer. We did have the one question about the removing the information center from the main screen, and we're going to show how to like drag out that modules
Oh, okay.
view so that because we can't really hide it, but you can drag out your modules list by doing a right click and expanding that field so it basically covers the information center. Was one of the questions that we asked that that was submitted that we didn't get an answer for. So I just wanted to bring that up. You're muted, Jason.
Oh, I'm muted. Yeah, so let's say we're looking here. We see we have our resources. We just want to see our menu. We don't want to have all this busy noise going on. We don't need it. There's no way to get rid of it. There's always going to be a tab open here, but we can just there we go. Now we don't have to look at it. The other thing you can do, if you want Sage in general to take up less space, you're just always using the top bar. So you can set it into toolbar mode, which here is just going to let us modules, and we can go, we change our module here, pick whatever, say I wanted to go into general ledger, and then reports budget. You can change it that way too. I like to have the big navigation pane and not the toolbar mode. I like to have all that information, but some people prefer to not have Sage take up their whole desktop, and that's totally reasonable too. Thanks for reminding me. I forgot about that one. Okay, do we have any other questions that I missed or?
I don't think so. I don't see. Looks like we covered questions.
Okay. So we had one question submitted from a anonymous user, which is what's the best part of working with the amazing Vbcc group? And that definitely wasn't a plan in the audience. It was a honest to goodness question that just a random passerby asked. So for me personally, it's really awesome to be working with a really knowledgeable and helpful team that like really wants to work as a team together. I've, in previous situations, I was used to relying entirely on myself and, having to find my own answers all the time. And it's nice that sometimes when I don't know the answer, can't find it, I have a whole team of very knowledgeable and very helpful people who I can ask who, can help me figure out what's going on. And that's just a really, really cool thing. And everyone here is also just really, really generally great to work with. And that's been really nice.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly with Justin. It is nice that we have such a diverse group of talent as well. So if, somebody else is a bit more experienced in that particular task, there always is somebody, and everybody is very generous with their time and their knowledge. And like I said, I didn't realize how happy I could be working again until I joined the Vbcc group. And it's just a fabulous, as a whole, even outside of just the consulting group, the organization in general, and the clients that we deal with.
For sure.
The variety of projects that I get to work on and the diversity of our clients as well is exciting and never a dull moment, which is great. So fabulous place.
Yeah, I have to say I've had a lot of really, even in a short amount of time, a lot of really positive client experiences, and that's been very, very nice. because as stressful as it can be when things go wrong in your software, it's also very stressful to troubleshoot that software. And it's just nice to virtually always be working with understanding people who are willing to work together to find a solution to the problem, because that's really what I want to be doing. It looks like we ran a little bit under, so if anyone has any other questions, we have time to field them before the end of the session.
While we're
Nope,
waiting to
guess
see
we're-
if there's some questions too, I just want to remind everybody about the virtual business partner hall. Go take a peek at that. A lot of our valued vendors did give us a ton of content, and there's a scavenger hunt where you can win some gifts and some gift cards, I believe. So we've got a lot of things going on over there. It's on our homepage, v-bcc.com. There's a link. Well, all right. Well,
All right.
Justin,
I
Lisa,
guess I'll do it.
thank you. Yeah, appreciate
And,
you guys doing this for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I will the question sheet that I was working off of, I will be emailing that to all the participants who were here today. So if you want to look back on a question, don't remember the answer, pretty much in their entirety, the answers that I gave are on that sheet, and I'll be sending that out to everyone.
Perfect. What a great session. Thanks, Justin and Lisa. Thanks to all the attendees.
Yep, thank you.
And hopefully
Yep,
we'll see
thanks,
you live
everyone.
next year.
Yeah,
Hope so.
hopefully.
Fingers
Bye.
crossed.
Take
Bye, everybody.
care. Thank you.